Hey friends, and welcome to KALs On. If you're new here, my name is Caitlin and I'm a knitter, spinner, sewist, weaver, and sometimes quilter based out of the Pacific Northwest. I have just a normal podcast episode for you today where I'm talking about all the things I made in the month of July. So grab your craft of choice, settle in, and let's get started. If you're watching this video the day or the weekend that it goes live, it's the weekend of Flock Fiber Festival in Seattle. I'm so excited. I hope to see a lot of you there. But if you haven't watched it already, the previous video that I did on this channel was all about planning for Flock Fiber Festival and kind of 5 different categories that you might want to think about before you head into the convention center. So if you haven't watched that yet, definitely take a few minutes to kind of go through that stuff. Personally, I find that kind of planning really helpful and makes the event feel a little less overwhelming and stressful. I'm really excited to go and feeling very antsy to get my hands on some new goodies and to meet some of you. But like I said, today is just kind of a normal podcast episode. I want to go through all the things that I have made in the month of July. It's actually quite a bit. And I think I'm going to keep the same format as last time where I did knitting updates, spinning updates, sewing updates, and weaving updates. I'm going to kind of keep it divided by craft like that and see if we like that format a little bit better. I don't have any sewing updates today, but I think keeping it divided by craft is a little bit easier for me to wrap my head around everything that I've done. So if you have a preference on format, if you like seeing it divided by craft, or if you'd rather see it like all the finished objects at once, all the works in progress at once, etc., let me know your preference of format. But I'm going to try it again this way and just see how it goes. Up first, as always, we'll go over what I'm wearing. Today I have on the Sailor Swift top by Kudavakika or Veronica Lindberg, and this is the second version that I knit using Sandisgarn Tinlina. This is the smallest size version that I have knit. I think this one fits as pattern intends with a little bit of like neutral to negative ease. My main color is this really lovely navy blue, and then the contrasting stripe is just the pure white color. I actually have a different version of the Sailor Swift top as well that I knit last summer where I flipped the colors. So the main color is the white and the contrast color is the navy. But yeah, this is the original version that I knit with those colors, and you can kind of, I think, get a sense of the navy a little bit better in this version. But I love all my versions of Sailor Swift tops. I have 3. I'm gonna knit more. It's just a reality. It's probably my favorite summer knitting pattern that I have done thus far. Maybe to be topped by one that I'm gonna talk about a little bit later today. But it's just a really solid staple classic piece in my wardrobe. Okay, so now let's go ahead and get into knitting updates. I have 2 finished objects and 3 works in progress to share with you. So a lot has happened in the month of July. My very first finished object is my Skyline Tee. This is a pattern by Tori Yu, and I knit this using Sandisgarn Tinlina in the color Deep Burgundy. This is a really fun pattern to knit. It has and starts with these really lovely saddle shoulders that have a very nice ribbed texture. And you knit both of the saddle shoulders first, and then you pick up stitches for the back panel and do that. And then you pick up stitches for, each shoulder, join in the front and then join in the round. So it's a really nice process, I feel like, for knitting summer garments or just any garment in general. But when you're working on small needles like you do typically in summer garments, it is really nice to kind of have the process broken up a little bit differently, so it feels like each section goes a little bit faster. Like it doesn't take that long to knit a saddle, but then by the time you have the saddles on, the back isn't needing to be knit quite as long as it would be if it was just a standard drop shoulder. Same with the front. The front shoulder sides especially go by so fast, and then you're joining under the neck to join the front panels together. And then before you know it, you're in the round. Like it goes pretty fast. So it's a really fun pattern to knit, and I really enjoy the fit of this garment. I'd say 10 out of 10. I'm so excited about it. I've worn it like 3 or 4 times already. And it's just absolutely lovely. I did have to size up my needle to meet gauge on this version. I used a US 4 instead of a US 3, which is recommended in the pattern. I think my stitches are a little bit more open than pattern intends. Because of that, my yarn was just slightly thinner, but it has a really lovely drape. Feels very light and breezy and just really nice for warm weather. So I'm very, very happy with this. I can definitely see myself knitting other versions of the Skyline Tee, one of which I've actually already cast on that I'll talk about in a minute. But specifically, I could see myself knitting other versions of this using Tinlina. It's a decently affordable yarn and it feels really nice in this pattern. I will say, I don't think that I would knit this in like a pure white using Tinlina. I think that the stitches might be a little bit too big for my personal taste, a little bit too open and see-through, but in a darker or like a mid-tone color, I think it works out really well. It's not see-through at all on my body. And yeah, it's just really, really nice. So like I said, I did have to size up the needle that I used for the majority of the project, but I did end up keeping the same needle size recommended in pattern for the ribbing finishes. So I think the pattern recommends a US 3 for the body and a US 2 for all the finishings. And I did a US 4 for the body and kept the US 2 for the finishings. And I think it turned out really well. I also knit the sleeves slightly off pattern. When I was picking up stitches for the sleeves, I kept the recommended pickup rate, but it ended up being a few more stitches than what I was supposed to end up with. And I just decided to decrease at a slightly more rapid rate. And then I think I even shortened the sleeves maybe by like an inch from what was recommended in pattern, just because they were hitting the point that I liked on my body, which is like pretty far down. It was just a little bit above my elbow. And I didn't want to, you know, make it too close to my elbow with how the rest of it was fitting. I just thought a shorter sleeve length would be nice. But other than that, I knit this to pattern and it was really a joy to work on. My next finished object is one that I'm also very, very happy with. And that is my flock vest. This is a pattern by Andrea Mowry or Drea Renee Knits, and it was kind of a knit along for the Flock Fiber Festival this year. It was really a joy to work this one up. I love all the fun colors in this. It kept it very interesting and motivating to keep going on. And it's at a large enough gauge that it just also felt like it was moving pretty quickly. I knit mine using 2 strands of Knitting for Olive Merino held double. This started as kind of a way to work through some of my scraps that I had. I did have to order a few other balls of yarn to get the quantity I needed to knit this, but I'm ending up with less in stash than I did when I started, so that's a win. For my main color, this really lovely red tone is the color Pomegranate, and then my stripes, the blue on the outside here is Dusty Dove Blue, and the inner color is Oatmeal. I think it makes a really, really fun color combo that feels like playful, but also not so loud that I wouldn't want to wear this. I think it's a nice middle ground. The process of working this one up was slightly less enjoyable for me than the Skyline Tee, primarily because you're juggling 3 balls of yarn at once. You don't cut your yarn ever in this pattern, you just carry them along the side, which based on the frequency of the stripes and how much color changing is happening in the stripes, I think that's the right way to go. I wouldn't want to cut my yarn, but it was kind of, you know, it was just a little bit of a hassle to have 3 balls of yarn next to you at once. And because I was holding my yarn double, I had 2 strands coming out of each ball. I had one on the inside and one on the outside of my balls of yarn. So there was just a lot happening and a lot to like make sure I kept managed. But it did come together pretty quickly. Like I said, the gauge is pretty nice and large. And the stripes help you feel like you're making quite a bit of progress. Just for perspective, the day I'm filming this, Andrea Mowry posted a preview of her next pattern release, just a photo of the back of it, but it's a sweater that uses the same stripe motif as this flock vest. And like, yes, it was a little bit of a hassle to carry all the yarns throughout the project, but that level of hassle will not stop me from casting on whatever sweater she releases, because that looks so cute. I'm really, really excited about that. I'm not sure if it will be a pullover or a cardigan, but I think it will be lovely, whatever it is. And probably by the time you guys are watching this, it might be released at that point, so we might know. But yeah, just to put in perspective kind of how I would weigh carrying the yarns, I would still do it again for a good end product. And yeah, I think that this is a good end product, and I think that whatever sweater she's going to release is probably going to be a good end product too. The finishing details on this vest also go by so quickly, which is really nice after kind of managing everything throughout the length of the body, to have your finishings be one color and then also come together very, very quickly. It was really a breath of fresh air. On my sleeve ribbing, armhole ribbing here, I did add an additional row over what was recommended in pattern. I just felt like it needed to be slightly more substantial. I think I could have even gone up and done 2 extra rows instead of just 1. And that would look really nice too, I think. But I am happy with kind of the balance of that. I just felt like it needed something a little bit more than what I was getting. Other than that, the only modification I made was to the buttonholes, and that was just because of the size of buttons that I wanted to use. The pattern recommends a larger buttonhole than what I did. I used the same process and method outlined in pattern, but I just made it fewer stitches. I think I want to say this was a 2-stitch buttonhole, just to fit my size buttons, which are a little bit smaller, a little bit better. I am really happy with the button choice. They're just a really soft blue, and they like perfectly match that Dusty Dove Blue stripe color. I ended up taking a few buttons off of my Umbria summer top in order to make this happen. I just thought that they suited this vest so well, and I think I'm gonna wear this vest more than my Umbria summer top, if I'm being honest. So I ended up taking 2 buttons off of that and putting them on this. So right now my Umbria summer top is unwearable, and I haven't really missed it. I had such high hopes about that project. That was one that I finished this spring, if you're not familiar. But it just doesn't quite fit in a way that I love. And I can talk more about that if you guys are interested, but I think I might frog that project and reuse the yarn, which is crazy because I frogged a previous project to knit that one. So I'm having a hard time finding a project I really love wearing with that yarn, even though I like the feel of the fabric it makes. The patterns I've chosen just haven't been it. So I don't know. But anyway, back to the flock vest. This was a really fun project to have on my needles. It was a nice burst of color. As far as the wearability of this vest, I do think this will be something that I gravitate towards most in spring and fall, but I do think there is a use case for where I would wear this in the summer. I think my yarn choice and like the gauge that I worked at was a little bit more open than what was recommended in pattern. Based on what I've seen online, I think the yarn that was recommended was Ampersand Fibers Garamond Worsted. And I think that one is a little bit more structured and full than what I chose to do. I think this just has a little bit more drape and breathability in it. So I do think there is a use case where I do wear this in the summer, but I do think it will be something that I mostly pull for in spring and fall, just because it is still like a heavy DK light worsted gauge. But yeah, that is the flock vest by Drea Renee Knits. The next project that I have to update you on is a new cast on. It is one that I mentioned in my summer knitting plans video though. And that is the Champagne cardigan, which is a pattern by Petite Knit. I'm just at a point now where I have just separated the sleeves from the body. And so now I'm just kind of smooth sailing back and forth on the body. I'm finished with the raglan increases, which is quite the relief. But yeah, it's going really, really well. I'm really thrilled with kind of how this is fitting so far. I did just try it on yesterday, so I left it on the longer cable size to kind of show you what it looks like all spread out. It is gonna have quite a bit of positive ease on me, which was the goal. I'm really, really good with that. I'm knitting this project using Juniper Moon Farm Rambouillet, which is a 2-ply DK weight yarn. Really, really lovely and squishy and just really, really nice. I'm very pleased with how this yarn is knitting up. It's my first time using it. It feels really nice in the hand while I'm knitting, but also when this yarn gets blocked, it just blooms in such a lovely way. I think it's going to work out really well for this pattern. This pattern does call for a worsted weight yarn, so a little bit thicker is kind of the intention, but I think the way that this blooms at the end after blocking, it's gonna make a really, similar feeling garment. I originally swatched for this project on a US 7 needle, which is the recommended needle size in the pattern. And I really did like that fabric. It felt quite structured, especially after it bloomed, after blocking. But it was a tighter gauge than was recommended in pattern. And initially I was thinking, oh, I'll just do the math and kind of figure out, how many sizes I should go up and then like make any modifications from there. And so that was kind of the plan. And then before I was getting ready to cast this on, I like remeasured that swatch and it was tighter than I remember it being. And I was like kind of starting to do the math and I was like, this is pretty far off from the recommended gauge. And I just knew it was going to affect the fit and just like the intended drape of the garment. So I decided to swatch again on one needle size up. So a US 8 or 5mm needle. And I still really liked that fabric as well. And that swatch allowed me to hit row gauge. And then I was only very slightly off on stitch gauge. So it got me a lot closer to the intended gauge, and the level of adjustment that I needed to do to kind of the math and the stitch count was a lot more manageable. So I felt a little bit better moving forward with that. And especially with a raglan construction, row and stitch count are kind of both equally important unless you want, your armhole depth to be really low or really high. Like it does matter more so than in like a saddle shoulder or a drop shoulder, which you can kind of more easily customize the armhole depth. This one, the stitch count and row count work in conjunction. And so you can compromise a little bit in each area, but you don't want to have it be too off. Because my gauge on this project ended up being much closer to what was intended in pattern, all I did was I knit one size larger than I normally would. That felt like the compromise on the armhole depth would still be fine with me. Like it wouldn't be too deep. But then also it got me a little bit closer to the stitch count and like the intended circumference that I would like in the sweater. And then other than that, I just added some more stitches under the arm, and now it will be kind of the intended circumference that I wanted. And the armhole depth isn't too much longer than I would have normally had. So yeah, I feel like that was a good compromise. Like I said, this will fit with a good amount of positive ease. I think between 9 and 10 inches. So just a nice oversized cozy cardigan that I think will be really good for fall. So at this point in time, I do have to do quite a bit of length in the body still, obviously the ribbing at the bottom, both sleeves, and then this pattern has a double knit button band. I'm really hoping that I have enough yarn for this project. I just started my 3rd out of 6 skeins, but because I'm kind of altering stitch counts a little bit, it's kind of hard to estimate how much yardage I will need. But I am a little bit reassured by the fact that when I put this on, I don't think like the sleeves are already hitting like down here. So I don't think the sleeves are going to need to be that long or need that much yarn. And the body also obviously is that low on my body as well. And so hopefully I should have enough, but it's just kind of at that awkward enough phase where I'm not far enough to know either way if I have enough yarn or not. It's kind of just, a few more inches into the body, and I think I will feel more confident one way or the other if I need another skein or not. So yeah, it's just kind of that awkward phase where it's kind of hard to tell, but I think it will come together really well either way. My next work in progress is also a new cast on, and is also a new yarn purchase that came in the mail. I am using Coast to Coast Yarn Co. Cotton Merino in the color Bugs Are My Friends. This came in the mail really early. I wasn't expecting it till the middle of August, and it came in the middle of July. So that was really exciting that it came so early, but this was from the Book Tropes Round 2 pre-order. I just got a few skeins of this to knit myself another Skyline Tee. I loved this pattern so much that I ordered this yarn before I had finished my first version. Like I had tried it on at that point and knew that it fit really well. And so I went ahead and grabbed a couple skeins of this to knit myself another version. I absolutely love this color. It's a little bit more vibrant on just like your normal superwash merino bases. But on the cotton merino, it just really softens up really nicely. And I think it's just a really fun, vibrant color that I really love the look of. This is my first time knitting anything with this base, which is kind of another reason why I went ahead and ordered it. I was very curious about this base. It's 50% cotton and 50% superwash merino. It's a 4-ply, and there's 437 yards per 100 grams. The cotton content in this yarn is definitely noticeable in the feel of it. Like it's a bit drier feeling than just like a normal wool yarn. However, the amount of wool content in this still makes it really enjoyable to work with. I prefer working with this yarn over Tinlina, which I don't mind working with Tinlina by Sandus Garn, but this is definitely more enjoyable to work with. So it's been really fun to kind of compare and contrast my Tinlina Skyline Tee with this one, just like back to back. At this point in the project, I have obviously knit both of my saddles, and because this is knit in a lighter color, I think the ribbing comes across a little bit better. Is a little bit more noticeable, that detail is. I knit both my saddles, knit the back panel, the front panel, and I just joined in the round like an inch ago. So now I'm just knitting for the whole length of the body. And yeah, it should be pretty smooth sailing with this one. This yarn is definitely a bit fuller than Tinlina, so I am knitting it on the recommended needle size, which is US 3. And the fabric is a little bit denser and a little bit less see-through, which I think is the intended kind of drape and fit of this shirt. So I think it'll be really interesting to kind of compare and contrast both versions when they're done, see which one I like wearing a little bit better, maybe. And yeah, it'll just be a fun experiment. I did notice, and I don't know how much of this is the yarn base versus the lighter color. I did notice when I was doing the saddle shoulders, which is a rib variation, that there was some gaping in the last knit stitch before my purl stitch. That's a very normal thing to have happen in a rib stitch where you have more knits than purls. Like your last knit stitch is always going to be a little bit more open, but it was distracting enough for me that I ended up ripping back what I had knit in my first saddle that I was working on, and I cast on again and I knit the whole thing using combination ribbing, which involves wrapping your purl stitches backwards and then knitting them through the back loop on the next round when you're knitting flat. And I think it really cleaned up that one, column of knit stitches that were happening before every purl. And I don't know if you can tell, but it kind of also made my stitches zigzag a little bit. Which I was kind of, tugging on the bias and tugging vertically and horizontally to kind of even those out. And it did help a lot. So I'm feeling pretty optimistic that blocking will even those stitches out even more. But at the end of the day, I would rather have a little bit more zigzagging than a really gaping knit stitch every few stitches on the sleeves. I just felt like it didn't look super clean. And like I said, I don't know if that's the yarn that was kind of making that more pronounced, or if it was just the fact that this is a lighter color and you can really see it. But it was something that I was encountering. So I did do combination ribbing to kind of counteract that. On my burgundy version, honestly, I have no idea if that happened at all or not. It's hard to tell with how dark of a color that is. So just something to keep in mind is you might want to do combination ribbing on the saddle shoulders on this project if that kind of thing bothers you, and maybe depending on the yarn and the color you're using. But that is how my Skyline Tee is going. I'm really hoping that I can finish this before the NoahCon concert at the end of August. No one else in that entire venue will know, but I know that this colorway is called Bugs Are My Friends, which NoahCon's latest album is very bug themed. So I think that that would be a very fitting little top to wear to the concert. And just really, really cute. And even if it's just something I know, I think that would be really fun. But that's the goal. I think it is doable. Now that I'm under the arm, it's just kind of knitting for quite some time. The sleeves are really short. The collar's really short. It should come together if I want it to before the end of August. My last work in progress is one that you've seen before. but there is some good progress on it, and that is my Oxbow socks. This is a pattern by Andrew Mowry or Drea Renee Knits, and I'm knitting these using Coast to Coast Yarn Co. Classic Sock in the color Crater Lake. This is also a colorway that Erin had in the Joy Tones pre-order. I got this at the Rose City Yarn Crawl though, before that collection launched online. It's a really lovely jewel toned moody teal color. That just feels really, really nice. As you can see, I have finished my first sock here. I have all of my markers going down and I have cast on my second sock. I have completed the ribbing and then have my first 10 rows marked off on the cuff here. I am one of those people where like sock island or sleeve island, like that does not make sense for me. I love a second sleeve and a second sock. It's so nice. All my decisions are made for me and I just like have to knit and just like follow the first sock. So I love me a second sock. It's the best part to be in. And I have put this on pause to save to work on in the convention center at Flock. I think this will be a really good project to have at the state that it's in. But yeah, I love a second sock. Give me second socks all day long. At the first sock, I always procrastinate at the end of the cuff when I like have to decide, is this the length I want or not? And then I always procrastinate towards the end of the foot as well, where I have to like double check measurements and make sure I like the fit of it and all of that. So when all those decisions are made for me, I love a second sock. But one of the things that I do to help keep it feel a little bit easier for me is I add these stitch markers every 10 rows. And then I also add a stitch marker where I start my heel flap and gusset. So that's not necessarily 10 rows between those two stitch markers, but it is a nice marker for me to be able to see, you know, maybe on the 46th row or whatever is where this marker is, but that's where I started my heel flap and gusset. And I do the same thing down on my toe. So I think there's like 3 rows between these last 2 markers here because it was like the 103rd or whatever row that I started my toe on. But yeah, having those markers is so, so nice for me. It's really easy to just very easily read my work. I don't really need to count above 10 ever. And especially with the Oxbow sock pattern, it's really easy to count to 10 because there is a repeat that happens in the patterning of the foot. So yeah, it's really, really easy to count and just really mindless and really easy to just, you know, whip out your second sock. So yeah, I'm feeling good about this. And like I said, I intentionally stopped to leave this where it is so that it's a good project for Flock. And yeah, they're coming along really well. I'm excited to finish them soon. Okay, that is it for all of my knitting updates. So let's go ahead and get into spinning. There is a good amount to share with you today because we just wrapped up Tour de Fleece, which took up most of the month of July. And I have been spending a lot of time at my wheel. My primary goal was to kind of explore some different drafting techniques, some woolen spun things, play with some fiber that I had in my stash. I was part of Nellie Knit's Stash Dashers team. But then also I really wanted to just make sure that I sat down at my wheel every single day. Regardless of length of time, I just wanted to make sure I spun every day and be really consistent with that if possible. So I'm really pleased to say that I did spin every day. I did have a bit of an injury in the last week where my back was hurting quite a bit. And so I did go a bit lighter in the last week, but that's okay. I still managed to sit down and spin a little bit every day and just didn't do it to the extent of hurting myself. So that's great. I finished 3 skeins throughout the month. The very first one was this really lovely merino and angora blend from Bellwether Wool. This is 80% merino, 20% angora, and the colorway is their natural 2-tone. So it's just a really nice, soft, gray, heathered, marled yarn. That's just really, really lovely. This is the softest skein ever. I'm really excited to work up this yarn. Spinning this, I did a sample before tour started, and I noticed that the yarn was blooming quite a lot when I finished it. So I knew I wanted to end up with a fingering to a sport weight yarn, something a little bit thinner. And to get that, I had to spin my singles very, very thin. This is just a 2-ply, but I still had to spin very, very thin. And I wanted to do the whole thing using long draw, which I did as well. Of all my long draw skeins that I've done, I guess technically This is my 5th or my 4th long draw skein. This is by far the most consistent. I'm really proud with the quality of this. And I love the finished skein. This thing though, it took me so long to spin. In terms of process, I was over it by the time I finished this skein. It felt like it was dragging on forever. I put easily over 20 hours of spinning into this one skein here. But I was very much rewarded at the end seeing the finished yarn. It's just so lovely, and I'm really happy with it. And I actually have another bat of this in my stash in a different colorway. Basically, the lighter color in here is the other color that I have. And I thought after spinning this, I'm like, oh, I'm not touching that for a while. Like, no. And then I finished the skein and felt it in its final form, and I immediately wanted to put the other bat on my wheel. It was so lovely. So yeah, the process was fun at first, it got old, but I'm really pleased with the final skein, and it makes me want to do the other one right away. This skein is just over 100 grams. It's close to 4 ounces. And I got 800 yards, or just under 800 yards in this one skein, and the wraps per inch give me a fingering weight. So it's just a really lofty, lightweight, lovely yarn that I think will knit up into something really beautiful. I do think it could be really fun to get that lighter color spun up and do some color work with this, kind of between the two, maybe a shawl or something, but we'll see. Thankfully, Bellwether wool is very accessible to me. They're very local, and so they show at all of like my local fiber festivals that I have. And so it is really easy for me to go get more if I want to, a couple times a year, to pop down to a festival and get some more of this, which I think I will at this point. This yarn is so nice. It definitely took up the majority of my tour, and it was a little bit discouraging seeing so many people finish so many skeins. I think Melly finished like 7 skeins in the time it took me to finish one, but that's okay. I was not in this for output, and I kept having to remind myself of that. This tour for me was not about output. It was about learning. It was about process, and it was about working through my stash, which I did. So huge success there. And then my next skein that I spun was from Bramble Ridge. This is the color Koori, and it is from Shop La Mercerie's 2025 Year of Fiber. This was the December colorway, and I grabbed this in a D-stash from someone. So really excited about this one. This one is 100% Cormo fiber. And again, I just did a 2-ply on this one. I really wanted to make sure I finished at least one other skein during tour. After this big one, I was just kind of desperate to finish. So I did a 2-ply, and I did it a little bit thicker. This one is, I have it at 12 wraps per inch, which is about a sport weight. And this one measured out to exactly 100 grams when I finished, and it is 408 yards. So still very lofty and light. I did do a sample on this yarn before I dug into like the whole braid, and I experimented with doing long draw at first, and I didn't hate the resulting yarn, but the colors just felt a little bit chalkier than I was hoping for. They didn't feel quite as vibrant or distinct. And so I did play around with doing some different drafts and ended up using the continuous backdraft for this spin. This was my first time using continuous back in a few years. I played around with it at the beginning of my spinning journey, but haven't done it in a while. And so I was really happy to come back to that. It took a minute to get back in the swing of things and like to feel like I was spinning a good consistent yarn. But the resulting skein is just absolutely lovely. It's still very lofty and really nice, but it has some more definition in the plies. The colors don't feel so chalky. They feel a little bit more saturated and vibrant. Yeah, just really nice. I'm very pleased with the finished skein. And in terms of color management on this one, I did a 1-2 fractal. So it grades a little bit less. It's a little bit less of a contrast between the 2 plies and a little bit less changing of between the 2 plies. But it's just really nice. I love all the colors in this braid. It was just so lovely. If I could get more braids of this, I would. It's just really nice. That was my first time spinning Cormo too, and I'm really glad that I took some time to experiment with that fiber. I would love to grab some braids of that at Flock because I really enjoyed working with it. So Would love to do some more of that soon. The last skein that I spun up is still a little bit wet because I just finished it yesterday. But this is 100 grams, so my first braid of Hearts on Fiber Superwash Merino and recycled jeans yarn. Like I said, it's a little bit damp, so it's going to look a little bit different when it's fully dry. But this had 80% superwash merino, 20% recycled jeans, so a pretty high content of additive. Of all the yarns I spun this tour, this was my least favorite in terms of process. I had to accept very early on that it was not going to be a super consistent yarn. The additives were just very bulky and just like flew out of your hand sometimes. I did try like recarding it on my hand cards to see if I liked that a little bit better. And it didn't really improve it at all. It was just kind of, you know, I think the volume of additive to this fiber, it just was what it was. I tried to spin as consistently as I could, but I also just kind of released that expectation pretty early on. I ended up spinning with a short forward draft for this one to try and kind of tame down some of that additive and also to make sure that I was getting enough twist in there. I do feel like it had enough twist before I finished it, but it's relaxed enough in finishing that I might run this through my e-spinner again and add a little bit more ply twist. Just because, yeah, I think it's going to not be the strongest of yarn. I think if I were to knit with this, it would shed like crazy with the amount of recycled jeans in there. So I definitely think that this is a weaving yarn. It was a really fun like exercise in terms of just like letting go of control a little bit, and just seeing what happens and just letting myself be part of a process and not really worrying about the product too much. I don't dislike the finished yarn, but it just isn't quite what I normally spin. So I think this will be great to weave with. I might add some more ply twist. And yeah, I think the finished fiber, because it's worsted spun, there's like very little loft in this. It feels very dry to the hand, even as it is damp. It feels dry to the hand because I'm assuming most of that recycled jeans content is cotton. There's probably some synthetic stuff in there too, but it's probably mostly cotton. And yeah, so it has a little bit of a drier feel, but I think it will work well in weaving. Maybe do a wall hanging or something with it. I think that could be pretty fun. But yeah, it was a fun experiment. I'm really looking forward to getting back to some other fibers here soon. I do have another braid of this that I will eventually spin up, probably when I just kind of need a palette cleanser. But yeah, that is my third and final skein that I did during Tour de Fleece. Because I spun every single day during Tour de Fleece, I did decide to make myself take a little bit of a break now that it's over, partially to help my back finish like resting a little bit, but also I kind of want to keep my wheel clear in case I bring something home from flock that I really want to get on right away. So I think I'm going to pause on spinning for the next week until I get back from flock, and then we'll make some decisions there. I'm going to be using the spare time that I had been spending spinning, working on my knitting, but also working on some weaving projects that I'm really excited to share with you today. I have 3 finished weaving projects to go over, and then also a work in progress on the loom. The first thing that I finished weaving in the last month was this lovely scarf that I talked about in my last podcast episode. For my warp, so my vertical threads, I just used some hand-dyed sock yarn from Fuzzy Peach Fibers that I had in my stash. The fringe here is a pretty good representation of what it was. It was mostly neutral creams, tans, and it had some like blue-gray speckles here and there. So that was my entire warp. And then my entire weft, I didn't do any color changes at all, was using the Yak sock base. I believe it's Murray & Co. Wool Goods. I always get those words shifted up when I talk about their brand, but I believe it's Murray & Co. Wool Goods. In the color Foxy. It has just so many beautiful, rich, moody jewel tone colors. There's like a brick red, into a burgundy, into a brown, into a gold, and a tan, and then there's like flecks of blue, like a really deep navy blue in there as well. So just absolutely lovely yarn that I've had in stash and just didn't know what to do with for a while. So I'm really pleased to have them worked up together into a nice little scarf. The length of the scarf is pretty decent. Obviously that's folded in half. So the length of the scarf is pretty decent. I think I would like maybe a little bit of a longer scarf in future. I forget the actual term of it, but there's some shrinkage that happens in the warp because your threads aren't straight and parallel. As they get woven, they're doing this. And so is the weft yarns. They're both kind of crossing over each other. And so it shrinks a little bit in length. Maybe it's take up, or is that vertical? I'm still new to this. But yeah, I think I would probably make a slightly longer warp next time, but it's still totally a usable scarf and it's really, really nice. And I think all the colors, it just like has a really nice, calm visual texture to it that just feels really, really pleasing. So I'm very, very happy with how this came out and I'm glad to have got those yarns out of stash. So that feels really great. And then next I went ahead and worked on some towels, some hand towels. The very first one that I made was this kind of striped color gamp towel. And it's mirrored both horizontally and vertically. So the center is white, white, and then the corners are beige and beige. And then there's lots of color gradations happening between them. I wove this on a 10 dent reed and I double threaded my warp threads. So it was on the reed at 20 ends per inch. It shrinks up quite a bit after finishing, but that's what it was on the loom. And yeah, so I warped with 2 strands of beige at first, and then I changed to doing 1 strand of beige and 1 strand of yellow, and then 2 strands of yellow, and then this like linen oatmeal color into white, and then faded back out again. And then as I was weaving my weft, I did a section of beige, a section of yellow, a section of oatmeal, and a section of white. And so it just makes this nice little color fade gradation effect that is really, really nice. It finished, I feel like, in the wash really well. It has just a really nice like feel to it that I'm really happy with. And then I had these kind of sitting waiting to be finished for quite some time. So it was literally just last night that I trimmed and I hemmed these towels. And I noticed in the process that there was just some things that I definitely missed. My warp tension on this was still not great. I experimented with a few things and in many ways it was improved, but it wasn't as good of a warp and like just general experience as my wool projects have been. Cotton just has no give whatsoever. And so I feel like tension is a little bit harder to master with cotton. It was an improvement, but there were still some struggles. And yeah, there's definitely a few errors that I did not notice while I was weaving, but I'm seeing now that the towel is finished, but that's totally okay. It's still a super functional, fun, beautiful towel, and I'm really excited to use it. And then after I finished that project, I went ahead and did another towel, which is a little bit simpler, but I think is a bit more successful as well. I tried out a different method for warp tension. I used is it crank and yank or yank and crank? I don't know. I used that method to wind the warp onto my back beam, and I think it was a huge step up. I think there is still a little bit of room for improvement, but it was a lot better. But this one was just a much simpler towel here, but I think it turned out really nice. I'm very happy. I feel like it's very polished. And so that's really great. For this one, I did a mostly white warp. It's also woven at the same ends per inch as the previous version. So my warp is double threaded on a 10 dent reed, and then my weft is held single. So I mostly threaded with white thread through my warp all the way through here and then on the end here. But then I did a few stripes of yellow warp as well. And then for my weft, I did this yellow color just all the way through throughout the entire project. And so you get these really nice yellow stripes on the end that are just like pure yellow vertical and horizontal. And then the bulk of the towel is kind of, it's white and yellow crossing over each other. So there's a little bit of visual texture there that I think is really, really nice. I landed on this combo because of this towel. One of the reasons why I had so many color changes happening in this towel is so that you can see how different colors play with each other. So you can see in this section of this first towel here, I had white warp and yellow weft, and I really liked the way that that looked. And so that's why I decided to do a whole towel with it. Now that these are all finished, I can just really appreciate the end product and also appreciate how much I learned between my first and my second one. I am really excited to do some more towels soon. I have one project currently on my loom that is kind of a little bit hard to show in this kind of camera angle. So I'm going to pop you over to an above shot and we'll talk about my project. So this is the setup that I currently have on my loom. It's this really fun like plaid color and weave that I'm really excited about. This was not what I had originally planned for this project, but I think, you know, it's just been fun playing around with things and figuring out a good balance of everything. This variegated yarn right here that you see in stripes here is some hand spun Shetland that I did. It was one of the very first yarns I ever spun. It was using a braid from Wee Chickadee. Absolutely beautiful. Has some blues, browns, tans, and cream colors in there. And just really, really nice. And looking at the yarn in skein form, I thought it fit this brown Romney that I had just spun really well. I thought they went really well together. And so I ended up doing some columns of this Romney that I just spun. That's just a natural chocolate color. Probably wasn't the best idea because this Romney here is woolen spun, which isn't ideal for a warp thread, but I was kind of just hoping that because it was small enough columns that it would be fine, which it has been for the most part. We'll see how it kind of comes out when I finish it, but it hasn't been too big of a deal. It's strong enough that it hasn't really been a problem. But then I wanted to also add some variation in the weft as well. I didn't just want it to all be brown. So I pulled out some old cone yarn that I have had in my stash for many, many years. And just kind of pulled some colors that I thought looked really nice with it. So this first one here is like this tan color. This is some merino tencel that I have. And then also I have this white color. This is an alpaca silk and just a nice bright cream color that I thought added a nice little bit of visual interest as well. Because it is so high contrast, I wanted to make these stripes a little bit more narrow than the more mid-tone tan color. Just so that it felt balanced and this didn't call too much attention. But I think it's coming out really well and I'm excited to see what it looks like off the loom. At this point, I have a little light bulb stitch marker in here and I'm kind of measuring how many inches I have since my hem stitch. And right now I am up to 50 inches where this stitch marker is. That's 50 inches from my hem stitch edge. So I would like to make a good like blanket scarf length is kind of the initial thought, and then leave some room for fringe. And then if there's still warp thread left at the end, which there very well might be, I might do some sampling at the end there. I have a few purchases in the realm of weaving in the last month, just little things to kind of help make the process a little bit easier. The first one is I got a color card from Maurice Brassard, specifically for their cotton. There are some samples of some other yarns that they use, but this is a color card of all of the cotton options that they have. There's 2 pages in here. So lots of colors to choose from and play around with kind of sampling and combining. This is going to be really helpful for me as I want to make more towels in the future. So this was a really great thing to grab from Eugene Textile Center. The other thing I got was a book that I had seen recommended online on some forums and stuff. But someone commented on my last podcast episode and recommended it, which was like really the deciding factor for me in going ahead and purchasing it. This is the Weaver's Idea book by Jane Patrick. It's a really lovely, thick spiral bound book with just lots of really helpful information and just really inspiring like ideas and kind of patterns to weave from, but showing you how you can make lots of different textures and do lots of different things with color, with pickup sticks, with different textured yarns and stuff. It's just been really, really cool to kind of flip through. I've marked off a handful of things that I want to try next. That I'm really, really excited about. And this has been a really great addition to my little crafting library. So if you're interested in getting a rigid heddle loom, I do think if you can find this at your local library or at your local guild or anything like that, flipping through this book even before you get a loom, I think is a really great idea. To get a sense of what you can do on a rigid heddle loom. This really opened my eyes even more so than all the other research that I've been doing over the last month. This brought a lot of ideas forward. So this is a really great thing I feel like if you can get your hands on a copy of it before you even get a loom, this is really great. Or if you're just getting started with a rigid heddle loom, this has been really great in terms of inspiration and stuff and instruction and detail. It's just been really, really nice. The last thing that I want to mention in terms of purchases, it relates to weaving and actually spinning as well, is I signed up for a membership with the School of Sweet Georgia in the last month, paying for it with my own money, not sponsored at all. And I have been really blown away by the quality of classes and the number of classes in there. There's also, you know, a community and a forum to share and ask questions and things like that. But I've been really blown away by it. I've heard a few people talk about it over the years, but ended up just, you know, trying it out for myself with the purchase of my rigid heddle loom. And it has been far and away worth the not that large of investment for a monthly membership. So highly recommend checking that out if you're trying to learn how to spin, weave. They also have classes on dyeing, like dyeing yarn and fiber, on knitting, on machine knitting, on like felting and fiber art, stuff like that. There's just a lot of really great classes. So I'll leave a link to their school in the description so that if you're curious about the kinds of classes they offer, you can check it out. Again, this is not sponsored. I'm not an affiliate or anything like that. I've just been really impressed and found a lot of benefit from their classes in the last month. So I thought I would pass that along to you if you're curious. So with that, that is everything that I made in the month of July. It has been a month full of creativity and experimentation, lots of learning, and just a lot of joy in making things. Thank you so much for spending some time and chatting with me today. I hope you found a lot of joy in whatever you've been working on during this time. You can always come over and say hi to me on Instagram or Ravelry. My username is KateCassOn in both of those places, and they're linked in the description below. If you could take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, or leave a comment down below, that kind of engagement really helps me out and helps my channel grow. I hope you have a great couple of weeks, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.